to the story of Shimshon. Okay, anything else? Anyone else want to say about Shimshon before we start? I'd like to just get a feel for what people know and what sort of first
His
impressions are about Shimshon.
his his birth was foretold by an angel who spoke to his mother and gave her instructions about her pregnancy. But
Right,
this angel never appeared to the father, which I thought that was kind of interesting.
right. Interesting. At the end, he actually does. I mean, she sort of takes him to this malach, this angel, and he sees him. But you're right. Every time the angel first appears to the mother and instructs her as to how to sort of behave with this pregnancy, um, she tells her never to go drinking wine and things like that, which is very interesting. You don't usually hear that the mother, for instance, a mother of a Kohen, for instance, you don't hear that she necessarily is not allowed to become, um, you know, ritually impure and go to, let's say, a cemetery or something like that. There's no such halacha. So this is a unique thing in halacha. Okay. So let's just I'm going to give maybe a brief overview about Shimshon. One of my goals for sort of portraying Shimshon is he's someone I think that a lot of people, since sort of maybe how the media portrays it or sort of in pop culture, this idea of Samson and Delilah, this hero, um, something that when you don't see it through the lens of Hazal, who reveals so much depth in his character and in the story, what his motivations were and everything, you can kind of think that he was just sort of this strong man without much depth behind him. So my goal is to sort of just give an example to show that without Hazal, we really have a very hard time understanding things according to their true meaning and true depth. Okay, so as was stated, Shimshon's parents were actually barren. His father was named Manoah, and his mother, we actually, her name is actually not mentioned in Tanakh, but I was looking around, and in Baba Basra, there's a Gemara that says her name was, not sure I'm pronouncing this right, but Zleponitz. Zleponis. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but that's what it says. Um, so his mother's name is mentioned in the writings of the sages. So anyway, so he's told, of course, to become a Nazir, someone who's forbidden to drink wine. Interestingly enough, as we'll see, usually when a person is a Nazir, it's forbidden to him to become ritually impure, for instance, to have contact with any dead body. But in the case of Shimshon, his Nazirus, his Nazirite vow did not include that prohibition. So one of the first things we see when Shimshon comes of age is that he goes down to a place called Timnah. That's this town that he goes down to. Does anyone know, maybe people remember from Chumash, another example where Timnah came up? Does anyone remember from Chumash where Timnah came up? So in Chumash, it says that Yehuda, when he at one point went up to Timnah, and that was actually where he met Tamar, dressed up as a prostitute. So that was where Timnah actually comes up first in the Chumash, in the Torah. But in this situation, it says about Shimshon that he went down, he descended by going to Timnah. And there he lays eyes upon a beautiful woman, not a Jewish woman, in fact, one of the women from the Plishtim, the Palestinians, I guess you'll sort of translate it as. And he wanted one of these women as a wife, and says as he asked his parents to basically, help him take her as a wife. And it seemed as she, was pleasing to him, and they ended up getting married. Now, an interesting thing happened when he was in Timnah. He actually came upon a lion. And it says that a spirit of God filled Shimshon, and he was able to take on the lion and kill the lion. And it says he met this, so he met this woman, he got married to her. And amidst the wedding celebrations, he went back to check on this, lion carcass, and he sees that the lion is filled with bees and honey, very sweet, delicious honey. And he tasted some honey, gave it to his parents too, and he didn't tell his parents where it came from. That's what it says. So again, so he marries this woman from one of the Plishtim, one of the Palestinians, and it says that he was actually looking for a pretext. This is what the text actually says. It says that so it says that Shimshon was actually looking for a pretext to sort of go against the Plishtim at the time. One of the important things to know about this time period during the Judges, was that Israel, the land of Israel, was actually ruled at that time by the Plishtim. It says that the Israelites did things that were not pleasing to God. And as a result, they were put under rule of the Plishtim. That was sort of the divine retribution for their sins, for their averas. And they were put under the rule of the Plishtim, who were not so friendly to the Jewish people. And interestingly enough, the chapter right before the story of Shimshon begins actually details a very disturbing episode in the history of the Jewish people, whereby the tribe of Ephraim, almost sort of, it was their fault, sort of the fault of another tribe too. It actually started a civil war. It was actually a civil war, the very lack of a unified Jewish people. That sort of ended up leading to this descent, whereby which we were ruled over by the Plishtim. So if you think that the Tanakh isn't so connected to current events, you can take a look at the story of Shimshon and what led up to the story of Shimshon, and you'll see it's really speaking to our generation in a lot of ways. So again, so Shimshon had this relationship with this woman, and the Sukkim even say that he was really looking in a way for a pretext to be able to sort of attack the Plishtim, to deal with the Plishtim and to give them a hard time. So, right, it says in chapter 14, verse 4, it says his father and mother did not know it was from Hashem, meaning his father and mother were very confused. Why do you want to marry this woman from the Plishtim? She's not a Jewish lady. So it says that his parents didn't know that this whole thing was from Hashem, for he was seeking, meaning Shimshon was seeking, a pretext against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines were ruling in Israel. So he was looking for a pretext, which leads us to the next part of the story of Shimshon. That interestingly enough, he offered a riddle to the people, to his wedding guests. And he offered as the riddle sort of a wager, a bet, that if you guys can guess the riddle, I'll give you guys, X amount of sheets and pillows and different things like that. And if you can't, you'll have to give me. So it was actually a lot of money at stake. And it says his wife, this woman, basically tried to get the secret out of Shimshon. She was put up by all these wedding guests. All these wedding guests told her to try to get out this information from Shimshon however you possibly can. Trick him, whatever you need to do, get the information out of him so that we don't lose all this amount of money. So it says she basically went and said, oh, you really don't love me, and gave him a very, very hard time, until at the end he revealed the secret to her, and they were able to, at the end, get to guess this riddle, and Shimshon lost all of his money. Now it says, interestingly enough, to pay up all this money, Shimshon actually went and killed 30 Plishtim, took their garments away from them in order to pay up for this wager that he had lost. So already he was using this loss of a wager, this bet that he lost, and the fact that his wife had betrayed him as a pretext to actually go and kill Plishtim. Because again, they were the ones who were ruling over Israel at that time. So the next thing that happens is Shimshon sort of comes back and tries to, resume his relationship with this wife, knowing, in fact, that in the meantime, her father had given her over to a different man. So again, so his wife now marries a different man. Obviously, this is not, a marriage that is allowed because she's technically married to Shimshon still. And of course, this just further irritates Shimshon, and he uses this as a pretext to kill even more Plishtim. So basically, Shimshon is using all of this sort of the way in which he's been betrayed by his wife as a means, sort of as a pretext to kill more and more Plishtim. Another example is he takes these foxes, he ties their tails together, sets them on fire, puts a torch in their tails, and sends them to go and burn these fields belonging to the Plishtim. And time again, he's basically just this thorn in the side of the Plishtim, and they're very angry at him. To the extent, again, they're ruling over Israel at the time, to the extent that they try to go and capture him. And they tell the ruling parties in the Jewish people, which was really the tribe of Yehuda, they say, you need to give us Shimshon. So they say, okay, fine, we'll give you Shimshon. So they go and they take Shimshon. And Shimshon is, not really, doesn't necessarily want to come with them, but he ends up agreeing to them. He agrees to the tribe of Yehuda to come with them, and they'll give him over to the Plishtim. And the Plishtim tie him up, and it says that Shimshon was able to break out of their shackles that they put on him, and he was able to, says he used a donkey's jawbone. Not sure exactly what that means, but he used a donkey's jawbone, and he again killed, says, 1,000 people with the donkey's jawbone. Not only did he escape from the Plishtim, but he was able to even kill 1,000 Plishtim. So almost towards the end of the story, again, we've already went through Shimshon's first wife. He gets captured. Yehuda themselves are the ones that give him over to the Plishtim, but he's able to break out and kill 1,000 Plishtim. So now it says he goes down to, of all places, Aza, also known as Gaza. And it says he sees a harlot there and he consorts with her. And it says soon after this, he fell in love with a woman named Delilah. This is the famous Shimshon, Samson, and Delilah. So again, so he marries this woman, Delilah. She's, again, a member of this Plishtim nation. And basically her people come to her and they say, we're going to give you a lot of money. Please tell us what the secret is. Where does Shimshon get his strength from? How is he so strong that he's able to kill so many people? We're very afraid of him. Please do whatever you can, Delilah, and get the information out of Shimshon. Where does he get his strength from? And she's offered a lot of money to go and do this. So she begs him. She says, please tell me where your strength comes from. She's begging, clearly you don't love me. If you love me, really, you would tell me where your strength comes from. So at first he says, if you bind me with 7 wet twines that have never been dried, then I would become weak like any other man. So of course, what does she do? She does that to him. And not only does she binds him, she even tells her country and says, I'm doing this. You should come and lay in wait while I go and do this, and you'll be able to capture Shimshon. So they ambush Shimshon while he's being bound by these wet twines. And she says, Shimshon, the Plishtim, they're upon you, they're coming at you. And of course, he breaks out of it as easy as anything. And his full strength was, very apparent in this. And of course, he's able to escape their ambush. But that didn't stop Delilah, and Shimshon didn't exactly get the message that his wife was working against him. Because again, she says, if they bind me with new ropes, with which work was never done, then I'd become weak. So again, he tells her, this is what would weaken me if you do this. So again, she does it, and she even tells her countrymen this is what she's doing. And again, they create an ambush party. They're ready to ambush Shimshon. And of course, he's able to break out of it very quickly. And she sort of goes to me and says, look, you've been lying to me the whole time. You clearly don't love me. You'd really love me. You'd tell me the real thing that gives you strength. So finally, she gave him such a hard time and begged him so much and made him feel so bad that she torments him. And he said, okay, I'll tell you, a razor has never passed upon my head. I'm a Nazirite. And if someone would shave my hair, I'd become weak just like any other person. So this is what Delilah does. She shaves the hair of Shimshon, and she tells the Plishtim, this is what she's doing. She gets him basically to go to sleep on her knees, it says. And they're able to capture him. They capture Shimshon. And he doesn't realize it. He thinks he still has his strength. He doesn't realize that his hair's been cut off. So he wakes up and he's, going to break out of his shackles, but he's not able to. So the Plishtim, of course, they're very happy. Finally, they captured this hero of the Jewish people. No longer is he going to cause them so much hardship and fear. And they say, okay, he's going to entertain us. And they bury him basically, you can imagine, like a Roman Colosseum type of place with a lot of spectators. And he's going to, entertain them. So they also do another thing. They gouge out his eyes so he can't see. And Shimshon is at the low of the low. He's blind, he can't see, he's shackled. He's basically entertaining a whole group of non-Jewish people. And he's made to feel very foolish. So at the very end, he cries out to Hashem. He says, remember me, strengthen me just this one last time, and I can extract vengeance for them, against them. And he grabs these two central pillars that the building's standing on, and Hashem gives him this last sort of amount of strength, and he's able to collapse the whole building, and he kills 3,000 Plishtim at this time. And that's the demise of Shimshon Hagibor and the sort of his very complicated, sad life. So that's the sort of summary that I wanted to say about Shimshon. I'm sure there is a lot more, that the commentaries say, and even the verses themselves talk about it. But that's the main idea that I wanted to express during the shir. So now I wanted to sort of go into perhaps a little bit about what Hazal tell us about Shimshon. Now, from the sort of a cursory glance of the verses of the Torah, you might get the feeling, okay, Shimshon is this sort of naive person. Maybe he was very, very strong, but he seems like a naive person. He fell, for these tricks of these women a few times already. And he doesn't seem to be such a bright person. Not only that, it seems like he was very weak in terms of his moral, his self-control. He's living with non-Jewish women and prostitutes, and it seems like he's, not such a high caliber, high class person. And sort of from a cursory glance of the verses, that might be the understanding a person might come away with. Now, the education, the chinuch, the training that Hazal give us when we approach people in Tanakh is, of course, the exact opposite of this. That when we approach someone in Tanakh and we see character flaws or the things we have to understand is that these people are paradigms for us in our journey in Avodas Hashem. They're people with struggles, but their struggles are magnified for us to see, meaning that their struggles in Tanakh are magnified. They hold up a magnifying glass to their struggles and we see their flaws, not because their flaws were so great, but because they're educational for us to see how we can become better Ovdei Hashem and better Jews. But of course, Shimshon was an incredible tzaddik, and Hazal are very, very clear about his level of righteousness, as I'm going to present a little bit. So, interestingly enough, there is a statement from the sages in Bereshis Rabbah. It says that Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our father, of course, had a certain level of nevuah, of prophecy. He could see a little bit into the future, it said on different occasions. And it says that he had prophecy. He saw Shimshon Hagibor. And he knew that he felt Shimshon Hagibor is on such a high level in spirituality. Shimshon Hagibor is going to be Mashiach. To the extent that Yaakov Avinu, when he saw through prophecy that Shimshon Hagibor would pass away, he was actually very surprised. He said, I thought this person was going to be Mashiach. I mean, Mashiach is someone who's going to be an incredibly righteous person. Well, the fact that Yaakov Avinu could make such, maybe a mistake, maybe not a mistake, into thinking that Shimshon would be Mashiach, the Messiah, shows us the greatness of Shimshon Hagibor. He was someone fitting to actually be Mashiach. Says another thing, Shimshon was the judge over Israel. Again, we're living in the times, Shimshon was living in the times of the Shaftim, the judges, right? Like the Devora, who were one of the judges. So Shimshon was one of the judges of Israel. It's one of the leaders. And it says that Shimshon was able to judge the people with perfect justice. He didn't stray one way or another. He was never bribed. He was never biased. He was able to judge right down the middle, exactly fair. And it says about Shimshon that his court was on such a high level of fairness and righteousness, it was like the court of Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Of course, we know Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest person, the greatest tzaddik we've ever had, and was someone on a level we cannot begin to understand. So if we're comparing the court of Shimshon to Moshe Rabbeinu's court, we have to understand that Shimshon was a very, very great leader and very great person. Another example, it says that Shimshon's name, it says that Shimshon actually is compared to Hashem. It says Shemesh umagin Hashem Elokim. So it compares Hashem to a Shemesh, to the sun, and to a shield. Right? First, Hashem is Shemesh umagin. Shemesh, of course, is the root of Shimshon's name, right? Shimshon contains in the name Shin Mem Shin, Shemesh. That's the root of Shimshon's name. So it says, just as Hashem is independent, he doesn't need help. Hashem is totally independent. He doesn't need a partner. He doesn't need help in fighting his battles. Hashem is completely independent. It says, so too, Shimshon Hagibor was totally independent. He was independent in terms of his battles that he fought in leading the Jewish people. And so Hazal actually compare on a certain level a midah of Shimshon to a midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you have to be a very, very great person to be at a level where you're mirroring the midos, you're mirroring the characteristics of Hashem Yisbarach. Obviously, we know about Shimshon Hagibor's incredible strength. It says that he had his shoulders from one side to the other. His shoulders, the width of his shoulders, were 60 amos. It's like 80 feet or something. It's crazy, a crazy size. I'm not sure whether they were speaking, in hyperbole or not, but the expression that Hazal are attesting to about Shimshon HaGibor's strength, obviously a strength that was from Hashem. Now, how could such a great person, Shimshon HaGibor, again, we're bringing all these sources from Hazal that show the strength of his character. He was a perfect judge. He had no biases. For a person to be a perfect judge, a person has to have stellar character traits. We see all the sort of, judicial, I guess, issues going on in New York City. I don't know if anyone follows the news about these things. I don't really have no idea what's going on, but I saw some headlines about it. Mayor Adams, all these things. When a person is in a position of power, a lot of times there's a lot of temptations. There's conflicting interests, and leadership power can go to a person's head. But it says about Shimshon HaGibor, he led the people, he judged the people in perfect righteousness. He didn't go from left to right or anything. He had no biases. So if that's true, where did he go wrong? How could he have had a tremendous fall? Again, we said already, he married 2 Plishtim women. Obviously, this is not something that anyone could imagine a righteous Jewish leader doing. This isn't something that he would do. So what happened exactly? So first of all, Chazal tell us, the Perushim, the commentaries on the story of Shimshon, they say very clearly that when Shimshon and Gibor married these women, they were not marrying them as non-Jewish women. They, of course, had them convert to Judaism before, and they were fully Jewish women before he married them. Now, they must have attained some allegiance to their people, to the Plishtim, but they were fully Jewish. There was no actual halachic problem with Shimshon marrying them. But still, nevertheless, we see that Shimshon, it seems, was taken to task for this issue. Again, he lost his eyes, and Hazal say the reason why he lost his eyes was because he strayed after his eyes, right? Like we read in the last paragraph of Kriya Shema, not to stray after one's eyes. So Shimshon strayed after his eyes. But the way Hazal, the Mefarshim, the commentaries explain his mistake is that when he went down this path where he was going to attack and find pretexts to attack the ruling Plishtim, again, they were ruling over the Jewish people with a very heavy hand and causing a lot of suffering to the Jewish people. When he went about doing this, he was going to marry Plishtim women. He should have consulted with other people. He shouldn't have taken it on himself to make the right decision without consulting with other people. So they find within Shimshon a little bit of a blemish that he shouldn't have gone just after his own eyes, just after his own reasoning. He should have gone to people who he could have consulted with before making these great decisions. So Hazal interestingly say there was 2 strong men. There were 2 great strong men. There was Shimshon, and sort of as a foil, as a opposite Shimshon, there was Goliath. We know the famous story with Goliath, with King David. So it says that Goliath was actually the opposite Shimshon. One of the rules in spirituality is that when a good force comes into the world, someone like Shimshon, who's a great tzaddik, opposite that force for good, there also needs to be a force for bad, because otherwise it almost wouldn't be fair. Things have to stay even. There has to always be sort of an even playing field in a way between good and bad. Otherwise, there's no free will and all these other issues. So Goliath was opposite Shimshon. And it says, interestingly enough, that they both had a downfall because their gift, their strength, it says, didn't come from Hashem. And the way the commentaries understand, what does that mean? Shimshon, we know his strength came from Hashem. He was a Nazir. That's where his strength came from. It came from Hashem. What it's saying is that he didn't use it exclusively for Hashem. So it could be Hazal are alluding to us that Shimshon, in a very small, minute way, maybe went after his eyes a little too much and went after his own desires a little too much, so that we can't say that Shimshon was completely working for Hashem. obviously Shimshon on his level, which is a very, very high level. So those were the statements from the sages that I wanted to share about Shimshon. And I want to discuss maybe just perhaps a little bit, a few of the lessons we might get from Shimshon, maybe apply a little bit to our time period, what we're living through right now, as I always try to. So the first question we always have to ask ourselves is where's our strength coming from? When the Jewish people are battling an enemy, where does the strength come from? So obviously we know it comes from Hashem. In Shimshon's case, his power came from his Nazirus, his status as a Nazir. He was someone who was holy, someone who set aside himself towards Avodas Hashem, working for the Jewish people. So we have to understand that our strength comes not from our military prowess, not from our deep pockets or anything like that, even though those are all important things. But the main strength that we get comes from our connection to the divine, the mitzvahs that we do, and the connection that we have to Hashem. So whenever we're thinking about Jewish leadership or anything like that, it always has to come back to the spiritual. Because at the end of the day, that's the source for any strength the Jewish people have to accomplish anything. So someone who tries to divorce the Jewish people from their root in spirituality, and it could be they're motivated by very lofty ideals. The safety of the Jewish people is a very, very important thing. But when a person, to that end, distances himself from the values that Hashem holds dear, then he's asking for trouble, as we see in the case of Shimshon, that once he wasn't focused exclusively on spirituality, and he took his focus off, he made grave mistakes. Another thing we learn, I think that's very important, is that we can't judge our leaders based sort of on a very surface level look at them. Just a cursory glance at a leader may not give us the full picture of who they are, what their struggles are, what their goals are, what exactly they're doing. If a person would look at Shimshon and just think, okay, he's this person going after Philistine women, and he seems to just not have a moral compass, even though he's the leader of the Jewish people. But obviously they'd be dead wrong because Shimshon was acting out of the greater good for the Jewish people, and he was trying his best to defend the Jewish people. In fact, it says for the 20 years of Shimshon's rule, and for the 20 years after, the Plishtim were afraid of Shimshon and didn't carry out any attacks against the Jewish people. Such was their fear of Shimshon after he passed away, they were still afraid of him. So we can't always see the full picture of our leadership, whether it's a famous rabbi or something like that. We don't see the full picture. We always have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they know what they're doing in terms of how they lead the Jewish people. The last thing, of course, it's related to the points that we said until now. We can't go after our own eyes alone when making a decision. We always need to consult with people who may know more than us, may have a different perspective than us. We can't trust our eyesight alone. Shimshon says that both of his eyes were gouged out. The lesson to us is, if we just make every decision based on our eyes, what's pleasant to our eyes, whether, whatever decision we're making, if it's just based on our own sort of basic look at a situation without consulting people wiser than us, people with a different perspective, then we're bound to make wrong decisions, as we see in the case of Shimshon. So there's a lot more to discuss about Shimshon. If anyone has any comments, questions they'd like to make about Shimshon, there's much, much more to talk about, but I don't have, so much time to do it. So this is what I have presented for the night. If anyone wants to look more into the story of Shimshon, it's again in the book of Judges, and it's from chapter 13 through chapter 16. And that's the story of Shimshon. One last thing before I stop talking is that the Kollel is running a fundraiser